Hi, I'm David Korn.
And I'm Jim Pinkerton.
Together,
we're bloggingheads.tv. coming back for whatever year this has been with us, David.
For more punishment. Although I tell you, I've been a little busy. I haven't been to the site lately. I still hope we're the best dressed. Blogging heads. I don't know if anyone else is wearing a tie there these days, but
I never do. So we can be.
Yeah. Well, at least you have a.
We cover both demos: the slacker demo and the suit
well, you're
demo.
not in your pajamas, and you don't have that Mickey Mouse. This is the guerrilla army dispatch look.
This is Che Guevara reporting from an undisclosed location.
Yes, we have your heiress daughter here right next to me. If you don't reform welfare, we will read policy papers to her. Mickey, I love you.
Because I'm actually speaking on a telephone. I apologize to viewers because there's a high-tech problem here, so we're doing it on a
You're coming to us from the New American Foundation using old American technology.
We're using a phone with a cord, which...
With a cord?
Yeah.
My kids would know what that meant. It's like 2 cans with a piece of string. We treat them.
Anyways, David, there's news going on. We should talk about this.
There's actually very heartbreaking, serious news. What's happening in Haiti now, and they still don't have the numbers in terms of casualties, but we've seen for the last day or two, video reports. The first few hours, there were these very, very, I think, poignant and sad Twitter reports coming out, which is probably the first, tidbits of news or first-hand reporting. Which I know others were just sort of obsessively reading because it's just so sad and mind-boggling to think about the loss of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives in the course of a day or two. On Thursday morning, President Obama came out and he pledged $100 million in assistance. He's been working the phones, talking to other world leaders. The White House, is very authentic and sincere in their concern. From a political perspective, they also know that they're being measured against the Bush response on Katrina. It's not quite apples and apples, but I think that's looming in the background for them. So they're being very forceful. I was wondering, from as an ideological point of view here, and I do this out of curiosity, not to put you on the spot, but as a sort of libertarian-ish, conservative, what do you think the role, responsibility of the American government, the American public, and other governments should be when a catastrophe of this sort happens?
I mean, I think that there's a legitimate role for sort of an international aid system, as in Haiti, as in the tsunami, some number of years ago. I don't particularly think the free market would solve this problem. It's not really obvious to me that government bureaucrats do such a good job, but I agree we should try and do something, even as we're mindful of best practices such as they might emerge, from NGOs and so on around the world on this. I mean, certainly. I was just talking to a fellow who is involved in a project in Madagascar, just as it happens, and he was telling me that all the timber smugglers, and that's a huge industry in Madagascar. Are using USAID equipment to do their timber smuggling, which is a little troublesome, I suppose. So, I mean, it's easy to say and proper to say we should be compassionate, we should help, we should work with everybody to do these things. But there's also a second burden, which is harder to bear in mind, especially when you see images of people suffering and dying on television. To make sure that you do it right, and that there's not much doubt in my mind that Obama will do a better job than Bush did in Katrina. But it's
one thing we have to be mature about is that you like thinking about science and big ideas. Everything is a system, and in any system there is never 100% efficiency. There's always waste, fraud, abuse, whatever you want to call it. And the goal obviously is to keep that as low as possible so that you have effective delivery of, in this case, assistance. But if you spend $100 $100 million, $100 billion, whatever it may be, and and it's 80%, 70%, 90% gets through, and 20, 30% doesn't. That's obviously not a good thing, but I've always been suspicious of those who, this is a great thing that the anti-government spenders like to do. And going after the U.S. federal budget, they find something that's $1 million. I'm now making the Dr. Evil gesture, which you can't see. That seems to be wasted. That's wasted, and probably is, and probably goes to a program that doesn't deserve it. But they use it as sort of the battering ram against a budget that's $1 trillion bigger, much bigger than that. So. I don't see a dime wasted. I want it all to go to, medical services, tents, food, particularly security, the UN mission there, and it's been very active, and actually it's been pretty much a unsung success story. It got rid of the gangs that were in control of the slums, and has brought about a certain amount of stability to Haiti, at least in terms of lowering violence. There's still a lot of political instability and a lot of poverty. And that was running at about $612 million a year just to sort of keep the UN mission going of a couple thousand forces. So I caution people out there not to play games when we will find examples of the money and the going to the wrong places, but hopefully the lion's share goes to the people who deserve it.
Right, as Franklin Roosevelt said in his 1936 acceptance speech.
Did you just Google that, or
No,
this?
No, I know this. I mean, I know. To those who say the government is doing things badly or inefficiently, he said, and this is Roosevelt. This is a different, obviously, era of political discourse. He said, "This is a quote. The immortal Dante tells us," unquote. The greatest sin is cold indifference, and by comparison, mistakes made in warm enthusiasm are not as bad as cold indifference, and I've always thought that was persuasive. I must say though,
you're Jim Pinkerton, and you approve of that FDR quote.
I do
too. I think that's a great quote.
Yeah. Shifting gears, though, I must say that I can think of three crises that have confronted the Obama administration in the last 3 weeks, and I'm struck by how differently they've handled them. Crisis one was the underwear bomber on Christmas Day. Crisis two was the Haiti earthquake that we just mentioned. And crisis three is this attack on Google and other American companies in China. And it is interesting to me that, as we all know, Obama took quite a long time to get around to saying anything about the underwear bomber.
3 days is compared to 6 days for George W. Bush with Richard Reed. So, I mean, you may think 3 days is quite a long time about one person who'd been apprehended.
You know me too well, David, to know that I spend my time defending George W. Bush. On anything.
But I mean, you said quite a long time. I mean, I don't.
And then more to the point, it was the Janet Napolitano system work.
Well, she had a boneheaded remark.
Well, she had a boneheaded remark, and then they've had this. Anyway, it's then okay. We'll come back on the underwear bomber. Then the second item Haiti we agree on. Right. And the third item is the China attacks on Google, and which I went to the White House website this morning. This is Thursday, I guess the 14th, and I didn't see a thing on it. I mean, I know it's come up in the briefing and so on, but it would not appear that the White House is scrambling in any way, or the administration.
No. I think you have to differentiate between what might be said publicly and what might be happening. I was interested to. I found it interesting to note, maybe coincidentally, that just a few days ago, the Justice Department announced the new head of the Washington field office of the FBI. What's his specialty? It's cybersecurity. There's been a lot of work done. There's this, a task force in cybersecurity, and they've really put a lot of attention to this in the last 11 months, 12 months. That I agree with you. The president hasn't come out and made any proclamations on this, but I would say you can't read anything from that in terms of whether they are actually doing what they should be doing in terms of the actual taking actual steps to deal with the threat.
Well, actually, I think you can read a lot into it. I think that and I've worked in 2 administrations. In an administration, the bureaucrats in the system there don't really get the message they're supposed to do anything until they hear the president talking about it. Now, that's just the way it goes. I mean, you can say.
I think there are a lot of very motivated people working in the field of cybersecurity who don't need to hear a soundbite to work on this. It would help them if they did. It would make them stronger in internal meetings. Look, everything is a trade-off. So listen, you want to talk about cybersecurity, we want to talk about Afghanistan, and we want to talk about global warming. Okay, so at the CIA session or the DNI session or whatever it is, and if it's in the front page of the Post this morning that the president had talked about cybersecurity, then believe me, that would get right to the top of the list. And again, I'm not saying that that's the only way that things happen in the government, although sometimes it seems close to that. It is just interesting to me that what the Obama administration scrambles on and what they don't scramble on. Well, again, I would say we need a little more information to know the degree to which they're scrambling or not on this story, which is just sort of broken in the last couple of days.
Okay, fair enough. We will come back on this.
Okay, but for reasons I can't reveal yet, it's something that actually does fascinate me as well, because I'm working on a sort of a related story, and I mean, from little I know, this administration has embraced cybersecurity. The FBI is embracing it as a priority. So I'm hoping that they're on top
I think
of this.
that we're going to wake up in a year or two and realize that Chinese really aren't our friends. But which will be
well. I think anybody who was in Copenhagen climate summit, as I was, realized that the Chinese are not to be trifled with, and that they really have the upper hand in many ways.
Of course, on that one, I agreed with them. I agreed with the Chinese.
Well, there you go. You
Chinese aren't all bad.
Yeah. So when it comes to heating up the environment, you're ordering in Chinese.
No, listen. When it comes to thinking about how to, what you said earlier in this conversation rang a bell with me. Like things are systems, and you have to think about the efficiency of systems.
That's right.
And to try to make policy in Copenhagen in 2009, imagining what technology is going to be like in 100 years is, to my mind, idiotic. And
well, when you have
fortunately, the Indians and the Chinese realized it was idiotic. The third world realized, well, here's a great chance to get rich, collecting foreign aid, and then finally the rest of the West, even the Western Europeans came to their senses and said, look, we can't do this. And fortunately, the whole thing imploded, and good riddance. Although I realize there's billions of dollars worth of bureaucrats still grinding away every day, thinking of new.
You're just like
schemes.
You're just like Jim Inhofe here, Jim. I mean, you can, if you want to say, that the scientists who say that that our temperature rise is going to be happening inexorably over the next 10, 20, 30 years, not 100 years from now, but we're talking about temperatures going up 1-2 degrees centigrade, which may be 4 or 5 degrees centigrade in Africa, which could lead, according to what they say, scientists who have studied this, to 1.8 billion Africans with without water. I mean, go ahead. And it's not about saying what the technology is going to be in 100 years. It's about getting cautious predictions from a consensus, even if some people might disagree. Again, you talk about systems efficiencies. If most scientists say that something dramatic is indeed going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and that if you don't address it, you won't have the chance to address it once it happens, because it will change the system, and you can't sort of restart the temperature cycles of the ocean once they stop. Fine. You can just sort of say, well, I'm willing to take that gamble. Maybe these guys are all wrong, and maybe if we try to do something about it, we'll make it worse, or it won't be efficient. Go ahead. In that case, I really recommend that you go out and you buy some property in the Maldives Island right now, or relocate to sub-Saharan Africa and see how it goes.
We've had this particular conversation before. If the environmentalists really were serious and they really thought that CO2 was as big a danger as they think it is, CO2 per se, as opposed to economic growth, which I think is their real agenda, if they really thought that CO2 was the enemy, they'd be for nuclear power.
Do you really believe this is a conspiracy, that they're using this because they don't want economic growth, that they're ginning this up, that the 40,000 people who gathered in Copenhagen have some sort of secret plot going on, that their secret agenda is to limit economic growth, and they've come up with something, and they've somehow managed to convince thousands of scientists to do their bidding for them?
I think they've made an
Is that what you think?
they've made an aesthetic judgment about economic activity
Who's the they?
and growth. The 40,000 people you're talking about in
Who's the
Copenhagen. The environmental elites. It's basically small C conservatism,
and so all those,
transmuted into sort of allegedly left policy.
And so the scientists who I spoke to again and again, who said that we need to cut emissions, we need to do so by 2020. I mean, who may or may not be environmentalists. Prior to this, they're climatologists, they're physicists. I mean, they're just going along for the ride. They're ginning this up because they've been convinced by elitists to fool the rest of the planet.
Well, they are the elite. They are the scientists.
Oh, so the scientists are just cooking this up on their own.
I think again, there's two elements here. One is there
I really don't understand what you think the motivation is for these people to sort of falsify, their reports and to put
I think it's
put out propaganda.
Staggeringly clear that they did falsify the reports.
They have.
So that's been proven.
No, don't even start with ClimateGate, because we'll go back and forth on this. But it hasn't been proven. There's still thousands of scientists. The work of the IPCC, which has been going on for 15 years now or so, is not based on these couple of emails that was swiped. It's just not. If you want to use that as a stalking horse, go ahead. But I really don't think it's honest.
Oh, fair enough. We'll leave that one. I don't think it's dishonest. I think that there's a difference of opinion. Let me make the point though. If I would take the anti-CO2 people a lot more seriously, if they said, look, in the spirit of solving this urgent crisis, which we're telling you is more important than Islamic terrorism, more important than stagnating economic growth, more important than earthquakes in Haiti, more important than China destroying our cyber infrastructure. To convince you, Jim Pinkerton and all the other skeptics, that we really think this is the crisis of the age, as Al Gore would say. Then I would say, okay, and that's why. Let me finish the sentence. We're embracing nuclear power because our goal is not to have people living in darkness. Our goal is to have high rises and lights and cars and everything else, just like the right wingers want. But we want to do it a clean way.
You're being a little self-absorbed if you're saying that the goal here is to convince Jim Pinkerton and other skeptics, many of whom are funded by places like Exxon and Mobil, and are not honest, not even honest skeptics.
Well,
I'm not accusing you.
I haven't gotten a dime
accusing you.
I'm talking
about
any conservative group on this.
Yeah, I'm talking. But wait a second. If you also think, T. Boone Pickens, I guess he's part of this as well, but he believes that you can do this without nuclear power, so he's investing in wind farms.
David,
I mean, we have. If you look in Europe and you see, Germany, which has nukes, moving away from nukes and now becoming one of the leaders in wind technology, as well as Spain, and cleaning our clocks on this. So I mean, listen, we can argue about nuclear energy. That's a separate argument. But to say that, unless Al Gore comes out for nuclear energy, he's not really sincere, and that therefore proves that there's a secret agenda here to keep the rest of the world in chains, I think is a little nutty.
Okay, well, that's what I think. And I would call Blogging Heads viewers, attention to the work of a professor at the University of Manitoba named Václav Smil, S-M-I-L, who he's written for the American Enterprise Institute magazine, which I realize, you say that's funded by Exxon or something, but I don't.
Is, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. But then the data should be judged, his argument is, look, it'll be 100 years from now before we can, on existing trends, before we can think about getting rid of coal and oil and gas and so on. And I just think it was pretty, and his dismissal of the prospects for actually powering anything with wind is withering, and I'm sure we'll put the link up for his stuff. To me, it's quite persuasive
Well, what you're saying, that doesn't get to the issue of whether there will be climate change or not. That's getting to the issue of, well, we can't really do anything about it now, can we?
Right. There's two issues here. One is the climate crisis real? And I look, for years, I've talked about this, and I've always said I'm sort of agnostic on the science. What I have said is if you want me to trust you, if you want me to go from agnosticism to belief on the science, then you have to convince me against abundant evidence that your real goal isn't have us all living in holes and wearing burlap.
Well, I don't think there's abundant evidence there. I would just say read the IPCC reports and realize that they're signed off by thousands of scientists, and then you can pick any other person you want out there and say, oh, he challenges this data, this person challenges this data, and decide to go with the outliers.
Well,
go ahead and do that. I'm betting on the consensus.
Okay,
I'm betting on the House.
Suppose we do bet on the consensus, then the question is the policy response. David, do you support cap and trade? Do you think that's a good idea?
No, I don't think it's the best idea, no. But
okay,
I think,
so
again,
do you support a carbon tax?
Either a carbon tax or just putting, regulating it like we do with other pollutants.
Okay.
I mean, not everything is done through cap and trade.
In other words, I think let's go back to this conspiracy issue. I think Boone Pickens clearly is part of the conspiracy. And I think that Wall Street was part of the conspiracy, and Enron was part of the late, extremely unlamented Enron was part of the conspiracy. You had this weird 80s, 90s, early O's fusion of environmentalists and market pirates like Enron, who said, let's do this elaborate cap and trade scheme, and you environmentalists will get what we want, and we traders, with TRADERS, we traders will make billions wheeling and dealing at the expense of blue collar workers in Indiana. That was so obviously a conspiracy, so obviously a meeting of the minds between Enron and Boone Pickens and the centrist environmental groups who were for cap and trade. It doesn't even the word conspiracy presumably has some element, at least in the popular usage, of they were keeping it secret. In fact, they weren't keeping it secret at all. I mean, you had groups like the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, which General Electric was openly agitating, saying, "Look, if we change the law, we'll make everybody buy our windmills." That's the most overt conspiracy imaginable. But it's still a conspiracy.
All I can say to Blogging Heads viewers who may be readers, to go out there and read the reports yourself, judge the number of scientists who back what the reports say. These are consensus reports. These are not the work of just a couple of individuals. And then, decide how scared you should be, and then decide if we should take the best policy steps that are, that can be cobbled together, whether they're perfect or not, to try to do something before we reach a point where it probably might be too late.
Okay. And readers can also read, Václav Smil, and then compare the issue of, all these issues of scarcity that the elites are putting us through now, to the crisis over coal production in 19th century England, where the elites similarly had themselves all convinced that England was running out of coal and they had to ration it in 1865 or so. I mean, it's the same. There's just a certain sort of.
I guess it's all part of the same Masonic conspiracy from then to now, right?
It's not Masonic. I mean, it is
simply a
Jewish
or something else
of elites that naturally tends to think that things are scarce and that the peasants are getting too much, which is, I think, is an identical worldview, I should say, to the healthcare discussion.
Listen, it's the third world countries that are now scared that they're not going to be getting enough water, and they're going to be having food shortages, and they're the ones. I guess they're all just don't know what they're talking about, saying that if China and the U.S. agree on a 2-degree temperature rise in Celsius, that's going to kill us, and it's going to be a suicide pact, and we need to keep it to 1.5 degree or lower, because otherwise we won't have food or water. I mean, they're the ones who are saying that the elites are killing us by not doing anything, by not doing enough. So you can go and talk to these African leaders who and decide which elites are doing what conspiracy.
And look, $1 million in their Swiss bank account would shut every one of them up. And if we really worried about Africa, we'd say, look, what does it take to get water there? That's not a hard challenge. I mean, I can remember reading somewhere about some global warming alarmist said, why to build dikes to keep America from flooding would cost 1% of our GDP over the next 100 years. I mean, we'll spend 1% of our GDP over the next 100 years on lipstick, on skateboards. I mean that's cheap. I mean these kind of engineering problems of let's get water. We didn't have any water in Utah or Colorado or Nevada until they built a dam. There's a million ways to solve these problems. I am struck by the way the environmentalists approach it, which is let's all go back to roll back 50 years of economic growth.
I nominate you to go to those nations to talk to the island nations, the African nations, Bangladesh, the Maldives, and just convince them that there's not much to worry about, that this can be engineered, acceptably, and that they can easily find funding for that.
And I nominate you to go to Greenland in 1200 AD and explain to people there who are then wearing T-shirts and growing grapes, not just food, but grapes in Greenland, and say that, look, in the next 400 years, it's going to get really cold here, and you're all going to starve to death, and you're going to have to go somewhere else. But unfortunately, we can't blame this on the automobile.
You give me Bill and Ted's
machine,
and Bill and Ted's machine, and I'll go back and give them fair warning so they can do what they need to do to survive.
Okay, very good. That's kind of you. You have a good heart. So therefore, we could say to other people, look, there are climate changes going on in the world. There's a reason why there were ice, glaciers over North America.
You want to argue that human-induced climate change is not going on. Go ahead. Let's do it another time, because I think you're in a distinct minority position. I don't think that worries you, but go ahead and we'll check back in 50 years. Okay.
Okay. The only point I'll make is that it would appear. And this is my last comment on that, and I'll let you have the last word after my last word. It would appear the environmentalists would rather have their grudge against Detroit and Jim Inhofe and gasoline and so on, than actually solve the problem, because they've set themselves in a box where the problem
Jim Inhofe
solved.
says there is no problem.
Okay,
Jim Inhofe, when I asked him what was behind this, he said Hollywood. Jim Inhofe is a nut.
Okay.
And if you want to associate yourself with him, feel free, Mr. Pinkerton.
I already
this
have.
is the guy who denies.
But I'm just going to say it again.
I've talked to scientists who he quotes. They say he misquotes them. He falsifies their research.
David,
so
you've clearly
it's
lost.
It's not about a grudge against Jim Inhofe.
Again, the environmentalists are a natural minority view. In the sense that they are naturally critics of the status quo. Everybody wants a car, the environmentalists hate it, and they don't want people to have cars. So they're outvoted by the consumers of the world. So the question is, are they content to just be critics? We told you so. The world's flooding. We're all going to die.
No, they're trying to come up with policies to make.
But they're not trying to come up with policies. They're not trying to come up with policies that would actually get enacted. They're trying to come up with policies that satisfy their moral view of the world with this Faustian fusion of the cap and trade stuff, which I think was so corrupt that it collapsed in the wake of Enron.
If you look at Europe, their cars get more mileage, and they tax gas. People use it less, and people may not like that, but they get along, and there's no consumer rebellion in Europe over the price of gasoline or the smaller cars that they drive.
And I'm happy with a carbon tax. No. And I'm happy with smaller cars. But the point is that's not what Copenhagen was about.
Have been pushing for raising the CAFE standards, and they actually succeeded this year after Detroit and Republicans, and a few Democrats from Michigan, fought it for decades.
And the environmentalists were content to make gradual progress like that.
Environmentalists pushed to do something about acid rain, and we actually solved that problem. They did they raised issues about the ozone depletion, the ozone hole, and we've with CFCs, and we now have cans and aerosol sprays that have solved the problem. Environmentalists, worried about clean air, too much diesel soot in the air. They worried about clean water. We passed the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. These are things that have made your environment, the air you breathe, the water you drink, cleaner, Jim.
And they also passed the Endangered Species Act, which guarantees unemployment.
Well, you just said a second ago that they're not interested in passing anything. These are your words. You speak in the broadest brushstrokes. They're not interested in passing any policies that do anything. I just gave you examples historically of what they've done.
Going back 30 or 40 years.
I'll go back further. Go back to TR, to Teddy Roosevelt.
Exactly, but that's my point.
They've been passing things.
Any movement, David, any movement
They've been passing things for decades.
Naturally runs to excess. As George Will says, the four most important.
Like the movement for women's suffragette and for civil rights, all things run to excess.
And if you say that we're going to treat African American civil rights, and then you say, listen, the same logic tells us that women's rights and gay rights. I mean, in other words, you find that you hit a curve.
You'd rather not have these movements, Jim?
Pardon?
I mean, you'd rather not have these
I
movements?
I don't think they're parallel.
Well, you just said any movement.
No, I said any movement runs to excess.
Yeah,
so
any movement runs to excess.
You go from ending slavery, which we all applaud, to ending separate to be equal, but which we all applaud, to affirmative action and quotas, which not too many people applaud.
Clarence Thomas did well by it.
Well, okay, I'm saying not too many people applaud it. And so the point is,
many women actually like the fact that there have been some affirmative action for women. Maybe a majority position. I don't think women are complaining that there was affirmative action for women in many jobs and many industries.
I mean, I think the American people are against quotas. And that's where the
I didn't say quotas. I didn't say quotas. I said affirmative action.
Every
into consideration.
Gets ahead of steam, and then it runs past its supply lines. It gets further ahead of where the public will put up with it. And that's the story of the women's movement, that's the story of civil rights, and that's the story of the environment.
Well, I'm sure 30 years ago you would have said, that Martin Luther King or someone was pushing too much at that point in time, or that
I was not saying that 30 years ago.
Medicaid went too far, and Social Security might have gone too far at the time. There are always people saying, you're going too far at this point in time. What you did 10, 20 years ago, well, that was fine by me, but now you're going too far.
You hit a point.
When you have 2,000 scientists saying global warming is happening, you're going too far.
The proof, there's a concept called diminishing returns, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which does say you're going too far. You push the tolerance for the system too much.
Yeah, but when the threats increase, you can just sit there and say, politics, we went too far with the Clean Air Act, so we can't do anything now about global warming.
I didn't say we went too far with the Clean Act. I said we're going too far with global warming.
Well,
I mean, again, I think, look, the proof, David, is that they built up ahead of steam based on the credibility they gained with
looking at the science. If you look at this, listen. I spent time with plenty of ambassadors and NGOs and officials from developing countries. In Copenhagen, these people are scared out of their mind over what's happening. It's in their interest not to be. They don't want to have to deal with this. They don't have to go up against against China and their fellow developing nations, India and Brazil, who are kind of screwing them. But yet they look at the science and they go, "Oh my God!" You can say, "Oh, they're being ginned up by Hollywood-driven elitists." Go ahead.
No, I think that's
absurd.
I said they are the elites. They're not being ginned. Hollywood is reading their stuff, and Hollywood. Barbra Streisand is trying to become an intellectual by listening to David Oppenheimer.
So the president of the Maldives, whose island is 2 centimeters above sea level, is an elite because he's now worried that there will be no Maldives in 20, 30 years from now.
But David, what if it were true, as some people say, that sunspot activity drives this, and the Maldives are going to disappear anyway?
Well, there's a difference between what some people say and what most people say.
Okay.
And you want to bet on some people, go ahead. But it seems to be prudent to bet on what most people say.
Well, no, most experts.
Most experts,
right. And I'm
most
saying
experts
that,
versus some experts.
Fortunately, again, David, what lessons did you learn from Copenhagen?
What lessons? Yeah. I learned that humans have a very hard time thinking about how to deal with problems that aren't right in front of their noses.
Okay, fair enough. So should the environmentalists do anything different? In the wake of Copenhagen?
Should they do anything different in the wake of Copenhagen? I think they should strategically. I think they should continue to place political pressure around the globe.
Okay, so
that's what they do, and that's what they're doing.
And you think that China's going to change his mind in 2 years?
China is the hardest. Not the hardest. Is a hard piece of the puzzle.
But India? Is India going to change his mind in 2 years?
I don't know.
Okay, well, the point is maybe you ought to...
But I don't say you don't try.
Well,
I don't say that absolves others of doing what they think should be done. And I think what you need to do, it's all about pressure.
You make them a better offer.
Well, if people won't do what's, Okay, well, let's move this to the financial universe here in the United States. There are some folks who don't give a crap what offer you are making them. Okay, so making China a better offer means China polluting more and having less responsibility.
No, the better offer would be nuclear power. Or some.
Well, China is right now free to develop nuclear power, as is India.
Make them a better offer on. What clearly has to happen.
We have a nuclear deal with India.
Okay,
that was signed by the last Bush administration.
50,000 nuclear plants, not 30 or 100 or 200 or something like that. I mean, obviously, if we really wanted to solve this problem, we would be spitting out nuclear power plants the way we spit out cell phones. And the Japanese have technology that does that, actually. Of course, So there's lots of. There's a million possibilities here. But what the environmentalists can't get themselves out of the box on is they want scarcity, and the world wants abundance. So if you're pushing scarcity and the world wants abundance, you're never going to win.
You should have been there and get out more, because that is not what they want. You may think that's what they want. It's not what I want. It's not what these people want. It's certainly not one. It's not what the developing nations, their leaders, and their citizens want.
So if I went to the Sierra website, right, Sierra Club website, or Environmental Defense or anything, hold on, let me finish the sentence.
They don't equate your solutions with nuclear power.
Okay, I know they don't.
You want to make that the only standard? Go ahead.
I think if I went to the Sierra Club, what I see is, look, we want everybody to have a flying car. We want everybody to have an automobile. Would they say that?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay.
I don't want. Do you want everybody to have an automobile? You want 8 million residents of New York City each to have their own automobile? Is that what you want? Especially when they fly. Now that'd be a great idea, Jim. 8 million flying automobiles in the canyons of Manhattan.
I'll say it again. Look, most people prefer not to drive in a place like New York because because of traffic and things like that. But I guarantee everybody in rural India wants a car, and I don't particularly think the Sierra Club wants them to have a car. I could be proven wrong. If the Sierra Club put on their website, our goal is so much clean energy that everybody in India has a car.
If the cars, which are not clean because they're not, few companies are making clean cars now. If the cars are going to contribute to other problems that we face, then you can say, it's my point of view that the planet can't take this, and therefore I don't want everybody to have a car. I don't want you think every family should have 3 cars, Jim? Or would you say 1 car per family or 2 cars per family would be a good goal to keep it low?
I would say
is it your policy, is it your view that we should produce as many cars as we want and not talk about alternative transportations, that we should, just because people want cars rather than subway cars, that we should give them more cars and just produce more and more and more cars?
I've said...
Is it your policy that we should encourage people to eat meat 7 days a week because that's what they want? Even though it's not good for the environment, even though their health impacts. If people want cigarettes, should the government not put warning labels on the cigarettes and say, go ahead? In fact, we'll give subsidies to cigarette makers, which we've done in the past. I mean, just because someone wants a lot of something, is that the best policy? Is that how we should deal with our societal issues?
Cut this last 3 minutes of your little, dithyramb there.
You can call it a rant.
No, because you're not a ranter. You're a nice guy. But I think that you perfectly sum up the environmental worldview, which the consumers of the world reject. And you summed it. You said it right there. Do you think if everybody wants a car, should we give it to them? Everybody wants meat, should we give it to them? My own view is that if you have a free world, people are going to get what they want. That's what freedom is. Now, if everybody wants to put their cow on the same piece of commons grazing area and eat it up within a year, and there's no modulation or regulation of it, we should just let that happen. No, I don't think so.
Because you know what the dilemma of the commons is. You're a smart guy. Yeah. So right away we're talking about regulating and limiting access to common goods.
You're not letting me have my fair share of talking here.
And you've talked a lot.
I would say this, that if you have a tragedy of the commons, then it is easy to create a political system that regulates it. And it will be popular. The point is, the system that regulates things...
It shows that it's not popular.
I'm sorry?
the tragedy of the commons it shows that it's not.
No, the tragedy of the commons.
You know, if we all share the atmosphere, which is the commons, and it's in China's interest now, you know, for economic growth reasons or whatever, to pollute that more than we can at this point because we've already had our growth spurt, then, you know, it's not easy coming up, and it doesn't make it popular to come up with a way to regulate.
I never said it was easy.
You said it's popular. It doesn't make it popular.
I said that you won't get a solution in a free world unless it is popular. Look, if there's a tragedy of the commons situation, and the farmers are putting their cows out there, and there's no grass left on there, and you just machine gun the farmers, then you solve the problem, and the cows, you solve the problem. But if you have to do it in a small d democratic sense, you've got to convince the farmers. You need agricultural extension agents and so on to persuade them there's a better way to do these things.
Then that's what's going on here and in Europe and other places where Barack Obama got elected talking about climate change, where, you know, Democrats passed a bill in the House.
Democrats can't even pass it in the Senate. I mean, 60 votes they can't pass it.
But they haven't done it yet. It's difficult. But they are. That's what's being tried.
But my point is, it's
that's what's being tried.
Okay, my assertion is, and we'll come back on this in 15 years.
And the Senate is about as the problem. The Senate is that it's not a democratic institution.
Fine, it's not, they're saying they have set themselves up for failure. And my suspicion is that they kind of like it, because it makes them critics, which is what they're really comfortable being, and you know, so they're content to just simply lambaste Jim Inhofe and Jim Pinkerton and everybody else for getting in their way. These guys being reactionary, retro, whatever.
These guys spend more of their waking hours working on policy and political and pieces of legislation and trying to get these things passed. Do you think the Sierra Club is not serious about passing? You think they don't don't spend time mobilizing their grassroots trying to get what they think is an effective legislative solution?
I think they spend their time mobilizing the grassroots. I think they spend their time raising money.
You know, they raise money. They've been doing education for years on this.
I think that they would rather make a critique than actually reduce CO2. I really do believe that. And my proof again is a nuclear power issue.
No, listen. I don't think you can call that proof. It's not proof by any definition of the word. It's not
the chance to go to Reagan Democrats.
I think we should
Reagan
move on.
Democrats in China, if you will, the sort of blue-collar masses of China, and say to them, look, you know, we're going to make you a better offer. We know what you want. You want a house and a car and all that, you know, and a TV set and everything like that. We want to be consumers, and we want that in India too,
and we'll
and we want
give
that
it
in
to you
Malaysia.
at
So we're going to get it
subprime
for
interest rates too, and we'll give it to you at subprime interest rates, and we'll make money while we sell it to you.
What the environmentalists would prefer to do is sort of cultivate their own purity, and we have the right ideas. We just can't get these oafs to agree with it.
I tell you, you got to get out more. I mean, the environmentalists who were at Copenhagen, didn't like the deal that Obama came up with, but some are accepting it, some are supporting it, some aren't supporting it. There is no, when you just use the phrase environmentalists with the capital E, it really doesn't do justice to a group of people who have a lot of differences, and and they're not purists. They really aren't. Some are pragmatic, some are compromisers, some aren't, and they have their own internal debates about that. So there's no lockstep elitist conspiracy driving these folks, because if that were the case, they wouldn't be arguing with each other about the best way to proceed. They would work this out at their secret meetings.
I think it's a scarcity worldview that they can't get that they can't get their heads out of. And they can't see that.
You want scarcity. You will have scarcity when temperature rates go up and crops die and water dries up. There'll be lots of scarcity.
And again, that's the point. Is 100 years from now, 50 years from now, this bad stuff happens. We'll be eating plankton and flying to space, and we'll be doing a million. I mean, again, this is
in our flying cars, right?
Who knows? The point is, that's my point. You got to make a better offer. You got to say to people, look, we'll give you X. All Exxon wants you to do is be driving in a second traffic jam for the next 50 years. We want you to have something better. And they're not offering something better. They're just trying to hit the middle class over the head with how evil they are by continuing to support the quarter-acre suburban lot. I mean, I read enough of their stuff to know that's where the James Howard pencils of the world are coming from. I'm aware of this thing, and if somebody had gone to Copenhagen and said,
it's not,
we're going to agree with our CO2 limiting thing, and you'll get more electricity.
They're flying algae.
Go ahead.
I think we should move on.
Okay.
We had so much else on our list, and we got distracted.
Let's talk about healthcare. Speaking of another elite scarcity agenda.
You're giving me a headache today, Jim. You wanted to talk about Avatar.
Okay, we can talk about Avatar.
I wanted to talk about the bank tax because, for me, which it's interesting, both politically and policy-wise. On Thursday morning, the Obama White House announced what do they call it? They call it the Financial Crisis Responsibility Fee, in which only the big banks, not your local community banks, but your biggest banks, I think they have to be the top 5% or so, will be more than $50 billion in assets, is what they say. Will be paying, a slight tax that will go to recouping what they expect to be $117 billion as the cost of TARP. It's down a bit because some banks have done a better job paying it off. And so that's what the Democrats are proposing, that the banks who were saved by this help pay back the cost, even though on top of the money they paid back. And the Republicans, I thought, you're a good strategist on these sort of things, immediately attacked this and basically said, how dare the White House propose taxing Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan and these others, and this is yet again the Democrats doing nothing but taxing. I don't know if you had to pick whether to be on the side of the banks or be defending the banks against a financial crisis responsibility fee. What do you think Main Street, the people you always talk about, the people who want those flying cars, are going to see when they look at the D's and the R's splitting on this?
They'll be confused because they'll think to themselves, why did Obama give them $3 trillion and now wants $100 billion of it back? Why did his Treasury Secretary conspire to keep secret the details of the bailout, and now they're doing this instead? While unemployment went from 7% to 10%. So,
and what will they say when they look at the Republicans saying, gosh darn it, these banks have suffered enough?
I don't think too many Republicans are saying that.
I got the Republican talking points right here.
Go read me one. What does it say suffered enough?
Well, not so. Obama to propose tax on big banks today, but these banks already paid back taxpayers. This tax would harm the economy. Just another scheme to pay for more binge spending. But they're basically doing the banks' work for them. The government made profit from the bailout to the banks. So there you go. They're saying the bailout was good for the government, and they should be satisfied.
I mean, as you know, I opposed TARP.
I know.
I opposed all these bailouts. I called it a giant scandal under the Bush and under the waning months of the Bush administration, and I continue to call it a giant scandal. I think that the Obama administration will be remembered as the equivalent of the U.S. Grant administration in terms of just being a slave to this giant industry. Back then it was railroads, now it's Wall Street, and they have no good choices anymore. All I can say is that in picking Geithner and Summers, they brought this on themselves.
Okay, let me go. We agree. I actually no, we agree on this. So it's boring. I want you to say something about Avatar, but before you do, just because I have to run to the White House and go hear what Robert Gibbs has to say today. But just quick on this one point, do you think the Republicans are making a mistake?
No, I mean I think it's too. I mean, I wouldn't. You don't hear me defending Goldman Sachs and saying they're getting a raw deal.
No.
But I think the politics are so murky that I don't think it really matters. But one thing before you get to Avatar, healthcare bill chances that Obama will sign a healthcare bill, percentage chances in the next 3 months.
Something?
Yeah,
I would say 70%.
Okay. Anything chances of signing anything close to what they're talking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by close. I mean, as the White House says over and over again, the Senate and the House bill overlap by about 90%. So
you're saying I'm just curious. I'm not going to argue. Just saying 70%. Yeah. There's a 70% chance that something pretty close to what they're talking about today, January 14th, will actually get signed into law.
Yeah, that's probably what I would put it.
I put
I mean,
lower,
I think
but okay. Yeah.
What you think? What?
Lower.
Well, okay, so quickly on Avatar.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw
it. Which seems old news now. No, I haven't seen it. I tried to watch a bootleg copy when I was traveling on the internets, and it came out in German. And it just didn't. The little fairies didn't seem to have the same amount of charm as I expect James Cameron wanted them to when they were speaking in German.
Obviously the movie is a phenomenon and so on, and it has a kind of lefty politics to it. Although, as I wrote for, of all places, Fox News, the real politics are kind of right wing in terms of the heterosexual white male, albeit turned blue, saving the day, from helping third world peoples liberate themselves. It has that, and I wrote that back in December. What I was,
you might call it's blue man's burden.
What also said was that the world that Cameron created, the computer generated world, is so beautiful and so enrapturing that somebody is going to get the idea of turning that into a Disneyland. Either a physical Disneyland that you walk around in, or a virtual Disneyland, sort of like the movie, like a video game version of it, or something like that. And I wrote that back in December, and just the last day or so, I saw an article somewhere.
Damn it! You didn't get to invest in.
I know I didn't get saying that there's whole support groups now have been created by people who are depressed at the reality that the planet Pandora, which is where the movie is set, doesn't exist. And so I repeat my call to those my favorite,
who watch Blogging Heads TV.
No, it's all those anybody Blogging Heads TV. Make people a better offer. If you want to convince people that the status quo should be improved on, don't tell them how you're going to make the status quo worse. Tell them how you're going to make the status quo better.
Well, let's give them a blue world that they can escape to.
People would pay you for it. That's my point. That is literally my point. People would buy it. And if people buy something, then you're on your way toward changing the world in a positive way that everybody appreciates.
I'll see you at the next VC meeting. Okay, because you got a pitch.
I got to, but you got to explain why it's a bad idea. Because
no. I think, listen. Disneyland, Disney World, they seem to do pretty well these days.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Listen, I cannot believe for a moment that James Cameron isn't already many storyboards ahead of you.
I'm sure he is. He's a genius. He's done more to advance movie making technology in the last 20 years than anybody.
Theme parks, restaurant chains, and virtual realities are all on his to-do list.
Exactly, and that's the reminder, which is the theme of this conversation. What the world, plural worlds, is going to look like 100 years from now. Nobody has any idea, and so policy is based on a 2010 apprehension.
You got to. I would say that that one lesson in life is to make sure you know the difference between fantasy and reality, Mr. Pinkerton.
And so,
if you ever have trouble with that line,
yeah. And so,
just give me a call.
Left wingers in San Francisco are the experts on.
We know something about flying cars, that's for sure. I'll see you next time.
All right, thanks, David. All right, bye.